Okay, so an overview of suitability. We're going to be looking at the properties and how they interact. We'll be looking at the conditions, the different sorts of suitability constraints we can have. We'll be looking at the suitability report that comes out at the end of the check. Testing to make sure that the suitability is giving us the results we expect, and some real life examples. So essentially, suitability is used in FormPack to give a yes/no answer to the question, is this item suitable for all of the stated inputs? And the different inputs can be item type and class. So it can be set to raw materials and formulations, or if you have different raw material items and types and classes, it can be used to differentiate. It can be applied to different parties. So a party can be a customer or a supplier, a geographical region, or even global to encompass everyone. Application. So this is the intended use for the item being checked. So this may not be necessarily your company's use. It could be your customer's use, and you can still do a check on their behalf using a representation of their application end use. Dosage. Compliance is sometimes absolute. So if, for example, you don't want a specific chemical to appear in a mixture, the dosage is irrelevant. If you want something that's allergen free, the dosage is irrelevant. But sometimes, such as labeling, it can be dependent on the dosage of the mixture in the product. And in application, checks either the item being checked or an end use, i.e. the application that's been added. In order to understand the different types of conditions used in the suitability checking, we also need to understand the different types of properties and how they interact with raw materials and formulations. So some of the property value types that we have in FormPack, and there'll be more information in the properties presentation, are a yes/no property. So the answer can either be yes or no. That's fairly straightforward. But just be aware that there is also a does not have. So it's sometimes neither yes nor no if the property isn't applied. Percent. So that can be used, for example, what percentage of this particular mixture is allergens, that sort of thing. Percent TFV properties are reasonably complicated, and they're used for GHS and CLP hazards. Number properties, plain and simply a number. Text properties, example could be a UFI number, which is a mixture of letters and numbers. A choice property, where you can only choose one of the options from the stated list. A multiple choice property, which allows multiple options from the list. And an entry list property. And these are typically used in conjunction with other yes/no properties. For example, to show all the names of the allergens present in the allergen declaration, an entry list based on all of the raw materials that have the property AGN is an example. So it's apparent that if you try and add, for example, a property maximum condition to a yes/no property, you'll not get a meaningful result. So a property maximum would have to apply to a number or a percent. So here are some of the conditions used in suitability checking. Property maximum. So for example, hazard labeling. If you want to restrict the hazard labeling, you would use property maximum. Property minimum is the same, but the other way around. So for example, you can use it to limit flammability by ensuring that a flash point is above a certain value. Property forbidden, it conforms if no items have the property. And that can either be the property being checked or composition of the property. Physical regulatory item limit, so either physical or regulatory, it's not both. And this conforms if the item is at a concentration less than the limit specified, either in the list of added raw materials in a formulation or any of the regulatory components that the raw materials may contain. An example is if you wanted to limit DPG in a candle formulation, that's the one to use. Physical or regulatory item count limit conforms if there's a fewer number of items with the property in the formulation, and similarly, physical and regulatory item property limit conforms if the percentage of items is lower than the limit. Limit property minimum is a specific variant of the property minimum, and this is used in certain circumstances where the hazard diminishes as the concentration grows. Examples of this are the IFRA limits. So as the item is more IFRA restricted, a lower percentage is allowed to be used. But also for some of the acute toxicity hazards in GHS and CLP, they use an acute toxicity estimate instead of a total fractional value. So this means that the less you are exposed to suffer the toxic effect, the more hazardous the item. There are some additional tweaks that can be made in the suitability constraints. So in application, checks the suitability as if for an end product use that contains the item being checked. So if, for example, you have a customer that wants to limit the labeling on their product but doesn't really care what the labeling of your item is, then in application is the right choice. There's also a fixed dosage variant where if, for example, a customer wants to ensure compliance at a specific dosage across the board, irrespective of how much is actually used in the product, then that can be applied. And accept is a fairly rarely used parameter where you can apply a suitability constraint as a whole and then make specific exceptions if there are fewer exceptions than there are constraints. We'll take a look at the report as we do some live examples. There's several places where you can do a suitability check. You can do it in the composition design tool as you're developing, within projects and tasks, in baskets, as an ad hoc check, and also as an addition to find matching items. It can also be set to automatically check compliance when printing a document. And whether or not the result is a pass or fail, the report may be viewed, and this may be useful because it also shows what's been checked as well as the results of the check. It's basically set out into three sections of what the inputs are, any constraints that have failed, and any constraints that have passed. When you add a new suitability constraint, it's always advisable to check that it's working in the expected way. If you just check it and get an expected pass without checking whether an item you expect to fail fails, you may be setting yourself up for future misery if it turns out, for example, that everything's passing when you'd expect some things to be failing. This can be a bit of a brain ache because sometimes property types can end up with different values that are quite unexpected. So as I mentioned, yes, no can have the values yes and no, but it also can have a does not have value. And numbers can be null, i.e. there's no number, or they can be 0, they can be below, at, above the limit, or even infinite. So there's a few examples mentioned here. I've also got some that I'm going to run through in the form pack application. And these are our contact details, which I'll try to remember to put back up on the screen at the end of the session. This is the form pack homepage, which I hope many of you are familiar with. And it's a link to our support center. So here we have a search bar where we may add any parameter or question, and it'll show links to our support content based on the search. We also have a number of training plans which put the existing support content into nice, easy to use, consistent flows. And there's a number of videos as well as other links to the support team. So in the left-hand menu, I'm going to type Manage Suit, and it comes up with the option Manage Suitability Constraints. So this is essentially a search field for the suitability conditions added. And if I don't add anything and hit search, we'll see that we get all the available suitability constraints that have been added. Some of them, like this one, are global. So this will apply to every suitability check that's made, and some are customer specific and some are standard for this example, fragrances, but wouldn't be for flavors. Now, before we get into the actual detail of suitability, just going to discuss some of the links between parties and applications that will make adding the suitability constraints a lot easier. Now, this is an example customer where I've added the head office for company Sniffs. And if we click related parties, we can see parties that Sniffs UK belongs to, and also parties that belong to Sniffs UK. So in this case, Sniffs Italy is a division of the Sniffs company, but it's not the head office. So it takes its suitability from Sniffs UK. Sniffs UK in turn takes suitability from a regulatory customer that's been added in order to limit the number of allergens that appear on a consumer pack label. And because Sniffs head office will inherit the suitability from this regulatory customer, the Italian division will also inherit the same suitability as it goes up the tree. So the regulatory cosmetic allergens customer will not inherit anything from Sniffs UK nor Sniffs Italy, and Sniffs UK will not inherit from Sniffs Italy. There's a view relationship diagram which can show the links between various parties. In this case, it's a reasonably simple diagram. But if you look carefully, you might just see that there's arrows going one way and then out again. Similarly, with the applications used, if I view application, right click, open a new tab. We can have a look at leave-on cosmetic applications. So this isn't an application in the true sense, it's an application group. However, in FormPack, it's much the same thing. So this is an application, but it represents all of the cosmetic applications that are left on the skin. And in a similar fashion to the parties, we can have other applications that leave-on cosmetics belong to, and other applications that belong to leave-on cosmetics. So leave-on cosmetic applications is a subset of cosmetics, and leave-on cosmetic applications includes body lotion and eau de toilette. So in this way, it's possible to use the application leave-on cosmetic applications, and that by adding a constraint there rather than on the individual body lotion and eau de toilette, you reduce the number of constraints that need to be added. So for example, as we'll see with limiting the number of allergens on a leave-on product, we only need to add one constraint and target this application, and then the body lotion and eau de toilette will be included. However, a word of caution is that using an application group is not necessarily the correct thing to do for every type of suitability constraint that you want to add. For example, body lotion and eau de toilette have different IFRA categories. So if you wanted to add a suitability constraint that was specific to IFRA, you wouldn't be able to apply it to leave-on cosmetic applications as a group, because that would give incorrect or inconsistent results for the individual applications. And equally, it's also important that when you're performing a suitability check, that you wouldn't use leave-on cosmetics as the application that you want to check, for the same reason that it wouldn't check the IFRA category correctly, because there's no IFRA category applied to leave-on cosmetics. However, if I view application and look at, for example, the body lotion, we see that the IFRA 49 category 5A is applied to the body lotion. So either from this screen I can hit add, or in the menu I can type add a new suitability constraint. And the first example I'm going to show is property minimum based on the property flashpoint, which will ensure that the item being checked is non-flammable. So add a new constraint. I'm going to choose the party to apply, and this time I'm going to choose the Italian branch of the company added, Sniffs, and this is because Sniffs UK does not want the constraint, but Sniffs Italy does. So if I'd applied it to Sniffs, it would apply to both. If I apply it just to Italy, it applies only to the Italian subsidiary, because there's no upward link from Italy to UK. So you can add a comment and the date. I'm going to apply it for all item classes and all applications. And I'm going to select property minimum. At the property FP. And the minimum I want it to be is 61. It's not going to be an application because this is to do with shipping the items that I'm actually creating as my company and not my customers. So I'm going to save that. And then it's a good idea to check that it's working properly. So in the menu here, there's an option to check item suitability. And so I add the relevant details. Not putting the customer code in the item. There we go. So I can still add an application and dosage to check, even though the particular constraint we've just added is for all applications. Check suitability, and we get an answer. So it's saying it's not suitable, and if we view details, we'll see the report. So here it states the item code input and the party code input, application and dosage. This particular application has no base associated with it. If it did have, they would be listed there. And then in the expanded parties, these are all the associations that the customer entered to check and the application entered have linked to them. So as we know, shampoo is linked in the rinse-off cosmetic applications, and that in turn is in the cosmetic applications. Shampoo itself is linked to IFRA class 9A. That's now obsolete, but there's still a link, and IFRA 49 category 9, as well as the customer links that we've seen associated with Sniffs Italy. And we see in the violated constraints that there's a flashpoint limit of 61, and the value of this item being checked is 23. So that doesn't meet the condition and demonstrates the fail. If I check the same item for Sniffs UK, we don't get the fail because that condition was not applied to this customer. So it's all passed, but that constraint doesn't appear anywhere in the report. It's simply not checked for it. If I check a different item with the Italian version of Sniffs, this time we get a pass. And we see that it's still checked the flashpoint. This time the value is 104, which is greater than 61. Therefore, we're getting a pass. In addition to checking item suitability manually, it's also possible to associate it with printing a document. So if I do a document supply condition, and look at the cosmetic data sheet, we can see here that document requires suitability check has been set to yes. So if I want to print this document, we know that the Italian branch for this item will fail. So if I try and print that, oh, I need an application and dosage, of course. It's done the suitability check. It says it's not suitable. It's asking me if I want to continue. This is because I have override permissions on suitability. It's possible to, via permissions, to set individual users or roles to not have that override option, in which case it wouldn't allow printing, and you'd have to check either with someone that did have the permission or change the item. If, however, I try to print the UK office, which we know to be fine, that will just print the item because it's suitable. It's also possible to check suitability in real time as a developer, either a perfumer or flavorist, is modifying a composition. So if you want to ensure the item that you're creating is compliant, you can check it as you go along. So if I check suitability for this item, EDT at 10%, I get a fail. And looking at the report, I can see that it's failing because the IFRA limit is too low and that there are too many labeled allergens in the end product. So I'm going to make a modification to this item, modify a formulation composition. And if I add an application scenario, it saves time because it automatically populates each time I check. So I hit save. And this is the formulation composition. So I already have it set up from other menus customize screen to show the IFRA category 4 and which items are allergens. But as some items may be buried in the regulatory composition, I've also shown the entry list AGNing details, which shows which items have a composition that has the AGN property applied. So from other menus, that's where you can also do check suitability. And we see exactly the same screen. Because I added the application scenario, it's automatically populated the party and application in there. And if I do the check here, we'll get exactly the same result as the menu option because I haven't yet made any changes. So that's still a fail, and it will still be failing due to the IFRA and the too many allergens. So just looking at the IFRA results here, if I wanted to check in 10%, then 10% of the concentration must be lower than the stated IFRA category level. So 0.33 is lower than 20, so that's fine. 0.04 is lower than 2.5, so that's not the problem item. It's also possible to run from here an item analysis report based on IFRA in order to check which is the most restricted item. But we can see here that isoeugenol is limited to 0.11 and we have 2.13 in our item. So if we were to take 10% of that, we would have 0.21, which is nearly double the amount we're allowed at 10%. So I'm going to remove the isoeugenol. And by doing so, that's also removed one of the allergens that I needed to get rid of. So because we need to get rid of some other allergens, I'm going to delete coumarin and benzoyl salicylate because they're quite low amounts. And I'm going to add the amount on this one component, eugenol, make it back up to 100. And then I can just go to check suitability and press the button. Now we see that this is compliant. And on the report, we see that it's still checking for the number of allergens. However, we've got 5 and it allows 5. The IFRA limit is no longer less than 100%. So we're good to go. And that means I can now save and check in with the confidence that this item is now suitable. Another place which may be useful is the search screen Find Matching Items. This is a valuable search tool for many departments. But the suitability check may be especially useful to evaluation departments that are maybe trying to answer projects or select items from the library. And so they need to know whether they're compliant. A big word of caution with this is that if you don't narrow your search down first and you search for hundreds of items with the suitability check enabled, it may take days and days to complete. So it's good practice to refine your search beforehand and then apply the automatic suitability check to it. So for now, I'm going to search for anything with a code that begins multi and expand library details with the toggle bar here. And at the bottom, change suitability check to yes. Apply the party I'm interested in. Application and dosage, which is optional when you're checking. And search. This then shows the search results with whether they're suitable or not. So this one, multiflowers 2, is the one that I've just amended, so I knew that it was compliant for EDT at 10%. And it's possible to view the formulation from here, but not directly review the suitability report. So If, for example, I wanted to see the suitability report for this failed item here, I would have to actually check the suitability again in order to see it. This is because find matching items is it's doing a lot of processing work already. So it just gives you the headline as to whether it is or not suitable without creating the report at the same time. Another area that may be used to check is baskets. So you can add more than one item into a basket and then check them all for suitability at once. So if you were doing, for example, multiple find matching item searches, you could add them all into a basket and then check the suitability at the end. Same old screen, it's already populated the items. Check suitability. So we see that these two items passed, but this one's failed. And we know why. It's because of the flashpoint. So from this search screen, you can directly view the report. So I think we've got time for another example. I'm going to add a new constraint. So once we've added a constraint, we get the usual form pack options of related processes. It's possible to add a similar constraint to the one you've just added. In this case, it's quite different, so I'm just going to add another suitability constraint so it doesn't populate the new constraint with the old details. And this time, I'm going to apply it to a specific application, which is drinks. And I'm going to add a limit property minimum. In application. So this is based on the flavor additive regulation, which applies limits in certain flavor categories. It's similar, very similar to the way IFRA limits work, and the dosage has to be compliant with the limit of the item. So having added this, I then want to check it's working properly. So if we view an item, I have an example formulation. And we see that this formulation contains propylene glycol. And that has a restriction as an additive in drinks. So if I look at the properties of this, so many properties, maybe I've missed it. Okay, so we see here that this has actually quite a low use limit now of 0.167. So this formulation is only compliant to be used in drinks up to a dosage of 0.167 due to its propylene glycol content. So from here, other menus, we have the option to check suitability. So there's lots of places you can find it. So if I check this item for sniffs, drinks at 0.2, we would expect it to fail because the limit is 0.16. There we go. Ready to drink, fail. Okay. However, if I check it at 0.1, we're expecting it to pass, and it does.